3:15 in the morning, June 22nd, 1941. Klaus is 23 years old. He is standing at the edge of the Bug River, and he is cold in a way that feels personal, like the darkness itself has decided to make an example of him. The river moves in front of him, black and silent, indifferent to the 4 million men lined up along its banks. He can hear the breathing of the soldiers around him. He can hear horses shifting their weight in the dark. He can hear, if he listens carefully, the soft metallic sounds of artillery crews making their final adjustments somewhere behind the tree line. He cannot hear the future. He does not know that 4 years from now he will be dead, frozen solid outside a city he has never heard of, in a war that was supposed to end before the first snow fell. He does not know that the letter in his breast pocket, the one he wrote to his mother 3 days ago and never sent, will be the last letter he ever writes. He does not know any of this. What Klaus knows, what every man standing at that river knows, is simple. This war will be quick. This war will be easy. The Red Army is a broken machine held together with rust and fear. One good kick, Hitler said, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. 6 weeks, 8 at the most, home before Christmas. Klaus believes this completely. 400 kilometers to the east, in the city of Kharkov, a 26-year-old factory worker named Ivan is asleep. He is lying on a narrow bed in a 2-room apartment, and in the next room, his wife is nursing their infant daughter. The apartment is warm. There is bread on the table. Tomorrow is Sunday, which means Ivan does not have to report to the factory until Monday morning. He has no plans except to sleep late, drink tea, and hold his daughter in the afternoon sun that comes through the window facing east. Ivan does not know that in less than 3 hours, everything in that apartment, the bread, the Sunday morning, the afternoon sun, all of it, will belong to a world that no longer exists. 2 men, 2 rivers, one moment that will swallow them both. To understand what happens next, you have to go back, not to June 1941, not even to September 1939, when the first shots of this war were fired. You have to go back to 1923, to a small cell in Landsberg prison in Bavaria, where a 34-year-old man named Adolf Hitler is sitting at a desk, writing a book. He has just failed to seize power in a beer hall in Munich. He was arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He will serve 9 months. But in those 9 months, he writes something that the entire world will later pretend they did not have the chance to read. Mein Kampf, My Struggle. It is not a subtle book. Page after page, Hitler lays out his vision with the patience of a man who believes he has unlimited time. Germany needs Lebensraum, living space. The German people are suffocating inside their current borders. They need land. They need resources. They need to expand east into the vast open territory of the Soviet Union, the farmland of Ukraine, the oil of the Caucasus, the endless steppes stretching all the way to the Urals. He is not vague about who is living there. The Slavic peoples, he writes, are subhumans. They are fit for slavery or elimination. The communist system governing them, which he calls Jewish Bolshevism, must be destroyed completely. Germany's destiny is to conquer this land, resettle it with German farmers, and build an empire that will last 1,000 years. He publishes this in 1925, 16 years before Operation Barbarossa. Anyone could have read it. Many people did read it. But the man who most needed to take it seriously, the man whose country was specifically named as the target, chose not to believe it, because Joseph Stalin had his own problems. By 1937, Stalin had been in power for over a decade. He had industrialized the Soviet Union at a cost measured in millions of lives. He had collectivized agriculture, broken the back of the peasant class, and built a military machine that on paper was the most powerful in the world. The Soviet Union had more tanks than any other nation on earth, more aircraft, more men under arms. But Stalin was afraid, not of Germany, not yet. Stalin was afraid of the men around him. He was afraid of his generals. In the paranoid architecture of his mind, every success created a new threat. Every capable officer was a potential rival. Every popular commander was a potential coup. And so in 1937, Stalin began killing them. Not a few, not the ones who had given him reason for suspicion. All of them. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky was the most brilliant military mind in the Soviet Union. He had modernized the Red Army, developed Soviet tank doctrine, and written the theoretical foundations of modern mobile warfare. He was arrested in May 1937, tortured into signing a confession, and shot in June. He was 44 years old. Marshal Alexander Yegorov, shot. Marshal Vasily Blucher, shot. 35,000 officers in total, three-quarters of the entire officer corps eliminated in less than 2 years. Men promoted not because they were competent, but because they were loyal. Men terrified to make decisions without Stalin's personal approval. Generals who had watched their predecessors die for showing initiative and had learned deeply and completely never to show initiative again. The world's largest military had been turned into a hollow shell. And then, in August 1939, something happened that shocked the world so completely that many people refused to believe it even after they read it in the newspapers. August 23, 1939. Moscow, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, the two most ideologically opposed nations on Earth, were the regimes that had spent years denouncing each other as the greatest threat to civilization, signed a non-aggression pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the two foreign ministers who shook hands in front of the cameras, was announced to the world as a simple agreement not to go to war with each other. Mutual respect, peaceful relations, borders honored. What was not announced, what was hidden in secret protocols that would not be revealed for decades, was the rest of the agreement. On Eastern Europe, carved up between them like a meal shared between two men who have just decided to stop pretending they are not hungry. Poland divided down the middle. Germany takes the west. Soviet Union takes the east. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, assigned to Stalin's sphere of influence. For Hitler, this was tactical. He told his generals from the first day that the pact meant nothing. It was time, nothing more. It's time to deal with France and Britain in the west without worrying about a two-front war. When the West was settled, he would turn east and finish what he had written about in his prison cell in 1923. For Stalin, the pact was survival. The Red Army was not ready, not after the purges, not with its best officers dead and its remaining commanders paralyzed by fear. Stalin needed years to rebuild, to retrain, to replace the men he had murdered with men who might actually be able to fight. The pact bought him time, and time, Stalin believed, was the only thing that mattered. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland from the west. September 17th, the Soviet Union invades from the east. Poland ceases to exist in less than a month. Split between the two powers like a loaf of bread, broken by two men who are not yet ready to break each other. For the next 2 years, Stalin does everything in his power to keep Hitler satisfied. He sends grain, he sends oil, he sends raw materials, our tungsten and manganese and rubber, everything Germany needs to keep its war machine running. Even as his intelligence services send him report after report, warning him that Germany is preparing to betray him, he keeps sending the trains. And this is where the story begins to turn dark in a way that even the darkest parts of what follows do not quite match. Because here is what the history books sometimes bury in footnotes. Between August 1939 and June 1941, the Soviet intelligence sends Stalin 84 separate warnings that Germany is planning to invade. Not 8, not 14, 84 individual intelligence reports from spies in Germany, from defectors crossing the border, from Soviet military attachés tracking troop movements, from British intelligence sharing intercepts of German communications. Richard Sorge, Stalin's master spy operating in Tokyo undercover as a German journalist, one of the most effective intelligence operatives of the 20th century, sends detailed reports including the specific date of the planned invasion. Stalin marks them all as disinformation, British provocations. London wants to trick him into a war with Germany. The British want the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany to destroy each other, while England watches safely from across the channel. He will not fall for it. In the spring of 1941, West German soldiers pour into occupied Poland in numbers that Soviet border guards cannot help but notice. Not hundreds, thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Entire armored divisions visible from Soviet observation posts. airfields being constructed, supply depots appearing overnight. The entire machinery of the largest invasion in human history assembling itself in plain sight along the Soviet border. Soviet border guards send reports. The Soviet reconnaissance aircraft photograph German positions and return with images so clear they need no interpretation. Soviet military intelligence analyzes the buildup and sends urgent dispatches to Moscow. Stalin's response is always the same three words: do not provoke. He orders Soviet troops near the border to hold their positions, to make no aggressive movements, to avoid any action that Hitler might interpret as hostile. As German aircraft violate Soviet airspace on reconnaissance missions, Stalin forbids his air force from shooting them down. German soldiers cross the border accidentally. Stalin orders them politely escorted back and returned to the German side with apologies. And then comes the detail that, even 80 years later, is almost impossible to process. June 21st, 1941, the night before the invasion, a Soviet freight train crosses the border into German-occupied territory, so it is loaded with grain and oil, the latest in a long series of resource shipments Stalin has been sending to Germany as proof of Soviet good faith. At the same time, literally the same night, on the same border that the train is crossing, German artillery crews are wheeling their guns into final firing positions. The men unloading those guns can hear the train. Klaus, standing at the Bug River a few hours later, waiting for the order that will send him across, does not know about the train. Yet he does not know about the 84 warnings. He knows only what he has been told, that the Red Army is weak, that the Soviet people will welcome liberation from Stalin's tyranny, that this will be over by autumn. He is cold. He is young. He believes every word of it. Across the river, Soviet sentries are singing. Klaus can hear them. Now we need to talk about the 5 weeks, because everything that follows, every disaster, every frozen corpse, when every city that burns and every army that disappears into the Russian winter, it all connects back to 5 weeks in the spring of 1941 that Hitler spent on the wrong war. March 27th, 1941, Belgrade, Yugoslavia, a coup. The Yugoslav government had just signed an agreement with Germany. They had accepted Hitler's terms, agreed to let German troops transit through their territory, bent their knee to Berlin, the way every small nation in Europe had bent its knee to Berlin by 1941. The deal was done. The agreement was signed, then pro-British military officers in Belgrade seized power overnight. The teenage king is declared of age and placed on the throne. The new government announces it will not honor the agreements of the previous regime. In the streets of Belgrade, crowds celebrate. In London, Winston Churchill allows himself a rare smile. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler goes into a rage. He takes this personally. Yugoslavia has defied him, made him look weak, unembarrassed him in front of his allies. And to make the problem worse, Yugoslavia's neighbor Greece is already at war with Germany's ally Italy, and the Greeks are winning. The Italians have been pushed back into Albania. Mussolini is humiliated. The entire southern flank of Hitler's planned invasion of the Soviet Union is now hostile territory. Hitler makes a decision immediately. Before he can turn east, he must deal with the south. Yugoslavia and Greece must be crushed. April 6, 1941. The Wehrmacht strikes Yugoslavia and Greece simultaneously. 33 divisions pour across the borders. The Luftwaffe bombs Belgrade without warning, wave after wave of bombers reducing the city center to rubble. 17,000 civilians die in 3 days. German panzers slice through Yugoslav defenses with the same mechanical efficiency they brought to Poland and France. April 12th, Belgrade surrenders. 6 days. April 17th, Yugoslavia signs unconditional surrender. 11 days. Greece holds longer. British forces have landed to help defend it. 2 divisions, not enough to change the outcome, but enough to make the Germans fight for every kilometer. Greek defenders in the mountain passes bleed the advance. They make Germany pay for every ridge, every road junction, every fortified position, but they cannot stop them. April 27th, German troops enter Athens. The swastika rises over the Acropolis. 3 weeks, another spectacular German victory. Minimal casualties. Only complete success. There is only one problem. Operation Barbarossa was supposed to launch on May 15th, 1941. That date is now impossible. The divisions that conquered Yugoslavia and Greece need time to redeploy north to Poland. Their equipment needs maintenance after the Balkan campaign. The supply network needs to shift from south to east. The entire logistics architecture of the largest military operation in human history has to be rebuilt around a new starting date. The new date is June 22nd. 5 weeks later. In April 1941, in the glow of yet another German triumph, nobody in Hitler's headquarters talks about those 5 weeks in terms of catastrophe. The campaign will be over by autumn anyway. Summer is long. What difference do 5 weeks make when you are going to conquer a continent? Here is the difference. 5 weeks earlier, the German advance reaches Moscow in September instead of December. 5 weeks earlier, the autumn mud, the Rasputitsa, the season of roads dissolving into liquid that will swallow the German offensive whole in October 1941, does not stop them because they are already at their objective. 5 weeks earlier, the Soviet government has not had time to evacuate. 5 weeks earlier, the Siberian divisions that will save Moscow in December are still weeks away from arrival. 5 weeks. Nobody counts them in April. Nobody will stop counting them for the next 80 years. She at Hitler's mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps, in the Great Hall where maps cover every table, the plan for Operation Barbarossa takes its final shape. 3 massive army groups attacking simultaneously across a front 3,000 kilometers long, from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. Army Group North, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb, will drive through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, will thrust straight toward Moscow. This is the main effort. This is the blade. Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, will sweep through Ukraine toward Kiev and the oil fields of the Caucasus beyond. 4 million men, 3,000 aircraft, 600,000 vehicles, 6,000 tanks. The largest invasion force ever assembled. Hitler's generals look at the maps and feel privately a cold anxiety they will not express out loud. The front is too wide, the objectives too dispersed, the distances too vast. Russia is not France. You cannot race from border to capital in 6 weeks when the capital is 1,000 kilometers away, and the roads turn to mud in October and ice in November. And the Red Army, for all its weakness after the purges, is enormous. Nearly 2 million men within striking distance of the western border. Millions more in the east. 20,000 tanks. Mostly obsolete, but 20,000 nonetheless. But no general dares say this out loud. Not after Poland, not after France, not after the Balkans, not when questioning the Führer has a cost that every man in that room understands, and none of them is willing to pay. So they nod, they salute, they prepare. June 22nd, 1941, 3:15 in the morning. The darkness is beginning to thin at the edges, the eastern sky showing the first faint suggestion of gray that will become dawn in another hour. Around Klaus, 4 million men are waiting in the same darkness, waiting for the same signal. 3,000 kilometers away, from the Baltic coast where Army Group North is massed in the forests of East Prussia, to the Romanian border where Army Group South's southern wing prepares to cross the Prut River, the entire length of the border waits. And then it begins. 3,000 guns open fire simultaneously. The sound is not like thunder. Thunder is a natural thing, a weather event, which something the human body has spent 10,000 years learning to tolerate. This is not something the human body has any preparation for. This is the sound of industrial civilization turned entirely toward destruction. Every engineering advance of the previous century concentrated into a single moment of release. The ground shakes, not metaphorically. The earth moves. Men standing at the river feel it through the soles of their boots, a vibration that travels up through their legs and into their chests and does not stop. The sky to the east turns orange. On the Soviet side of the river, men are dying before they understand they are under attack. Border guards wake up inside bunkers that are already collapsing around them. Officers grab radios to report what is happening and discover that the communication lines were cut hours ago by German special forces infiltrating the border in darkness. Soldiers run out of barracks that are on fire and look east for orders that are not coming. One Soviet border unit manages to get a signal through to headquarters in Minsk. We are being fired upon. What should we do? The response comes back within minutes. You must be insane. Why is your signal not in code? They think it is a training exercise. Even with the shells landing, even with men dying, the shock is so complete, the denial so absolute, utter that Moscow's first instinct is to assume it cannot be real. Across the river in his narrow apartment in Kharkov, Ivan wakes up to the sound of distant explosions. He lies still for a moment, listening. His wife appears in the doorway, holding their daughter, her face a question he cannot answer. He gets up, goes to the window, and looks east at a sky that is the wrong color for sunrise. He knows with the particular certainty of a man whose country has already been lied to about everything, exactly what he is looking at. Dawn. The Luftwaffe launches. Hundreds of bombers, escorted by fighters, race towards 66 Soviet airfields simultaneously. These targets have been scouted for weeks by German reconnaissance aircraft, flying over Soviet territory with complete impunity, because Stalin had forbidden anyone from shooting them down to avoid provoking Hitler. The Soviet planes are parked wingtip to wingtip on open airfields, exactly where the German reconnaissance photographs showed them. Perfect targets. Some pilots are sleeping in barracks nearby. Others are performing morning maintenance. None of them are in the air. The first wave arrives at dawn. Within hours, 1,200 Soviet aircraft have been destroyed, most of them on the ground. Some pilots managed to get airborne in obsolete fighters and fought back with everything they had. Brave men in slow machines against the best air force in the world. They were killed. By noon, the Soviet Air Force in the western USSR effectively ceases to exist. The Luftwaffe owns the sky. On the ground, the panzers are moving. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group, one of the most powerful armored formations ever assembled, crosses the Bug River and begins driving east. The advance is measured not in meters, but in kilometers. 40 kilometers by midday, 50 by evening. Soviet defensive positions are bypassed rather than attacked. I left for the infantry, following behind to deal with while the tanks race deeper, always east, always looking for the open ground where speed becomes the weapon. This is blitzkrieg at its most perfect expression. Everything the Wehrmacht had learned in Poland, in France, in the Balkans, applied now on a scale that makes those previous campaigns look like rehearsals. Panzer spearheads punch through Soviet defensive positions. Fast-moving tank columns bypass strong points. Am I leaving them for infantry following behind? The panzers drive deep, racing to get behind Soviet forces before they can react. Overhead, Stuka dive bombers coordinate with the tank columns, spotting Soviet reinforcements moving toward the front, diving with their signature, screaming sirens, bombing the columns before they reach the battle. Klaus is moving with the infantry, following the panzers at the best pace a man on foot can manage, which is never fast enough. While the world around him is smoke and noise, and the endless road east. Destroyed Soviet vehicles on the shoulders of every road, columns of Soviet prisoners moving west, so many of them that the German guards seem almost embarrassed by the numbers, waving them along with rifle butts, unable to spare more men for escort when there are so many more battles ahead. Klaus sees the prisoners and feels confirmation of everything he has been told. Look at them. It is already over. They are already surrendering by the thousands. He does not yet know how to read what he is actually seeing. He does not know that those men surrendering by the thousands represent not the weakness of the Soviet Union, but the particular catastrophe of a military whose leadership has been systematically murdered by its own government. He does not know that behind those surrendering soldiers, 300 million more Soviet citizens are watching what is happening to their country and making a different calculation entirely. He is 23 years old. He sees what he expects to see. In Moscow, in the Kremlin, Stalin sits alone in his office and reads the reports coming in from the front. Each one is worse than the last. He cannot process them. This was not supposed to happen. Hitler would not dare. The pact was real. The grain trains were real. And this must be a provocation by rogue German officers. Hitler himself does not know about it. Stalin picks up the phone several times and puts it down without dialing. He reads the same reports again as if a second reading will change what they say. It does not change what they say. Stalin, the man who murdered his own generals for showing too much independence, The man who had refused to believe 84 intelligence reports warning him this day was coming, the man who had sent grain trains across the border the night before the invasion began, does something that no one who knows his history expects. He disappears. For 11 days, as German panzers race across Soviet territory, as entire Soviet armies are surrounded and destroyed, as hundreds of thousands of soldiers die or surrender, Stalin essentially withdraws from leadership. He retreats to his dacha outside Moscow. His aides are terrified to disturb him. When they do bring reports, heck, he sits in silence or erupts in rage, but issues no coherent orders, makes no speeches to the nation, provides no direction to the military. The Soviet Union is leaderless at the moment it needs leadership most, and the Germans keep coming. By the end of June, 7 days after crossing the Bug River, Army Group Center has achieved something that military historians will spend decades trying to fully describe. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group, driving east from the south, and Hoth's 3rd Panzer Group, driving east from the north, have both reached the area west of Minsk, the capital of Belarusia. The two panzer spearheads meet, closing their pincers around 3 entire Soviet armies. 300,000 men surrounded, cut off from supply, cut off from reinforcement, cut off from escape. The German infantry, marching as fast as men on foot can march, arrives to tighten the encirclement. Soviet troops assault the German perimeter in waves, sometimes breaking through temporarily, small groups escaping east into the forests, but most are driven back. The Luftwaffe circles overhead and bombs any concentration of Soviet forces. By mid-July, it is over. 300,000 Soviet soldiers killed or captured, more men than the entire British expeditionary force at Dunkirk, eliminated in 3 weeks. Klaus, watching the long columns of prisoners trudge west past his position, writes home. The war is going exactly as they said it would. The Russians cannot fight. We are advancing every day. I will be home before Christmas. Tell mother not to worry. He seals the letter and gives it to a mail courier heading west. He will write one more letter 4 months from now under very different circumstances. That one he will not be able to seal. His hands will be shaking too hard. The ink will freeze before the words are dry. 400 kilometers to the east, Ivan is running. He was captured in the first week, swept up in the chaos of a Soviet defensive line that dissolved under German air attack before it ever had a chance to form. He spent 4 days in a temporary German prisoner camp that was really just a large field surrounded by barbed wire, with no food, no shelter, and guards who were too few and too overwhelmed to prevent a man determined enough from finding a way through the wire in the darkness. Even as a factory worker from Kharkov, he is not a soldier, not yet. He is a man who fixes machines, who understands how things work and what to do when they stop working. He crawls through the wire at 3 in the morning and disappears into the forest and walks east for 4 days without stopping more than an hour at a time. He reaches Soviet lines, what remains of them, and reports to the first officer he finds. The officer looks at him for a long moment, takes in the dirty clothes, the hollow eyes, the absolute certainty in his expression. "Where are the Germans?" the officer asks. "Everywhere," Ivan says, "and they are moving faster than you think." Ivan is given a rifle, a uniform, and 3 days of training. Then he is sent back to the front. He has left his wife and daughter in Kharkov. He does not know when he will see them again. He is not certain he will see them again. But this is not the moment for that kind of thinking, and he knows it. He is 26 years old. He has just learned something about war that Klaus will spend the next 4 years learning the hard way. The side that wins is not always the side with the better weapons, the better training, the better tactics. Sometimes the side that wins is the side that simply refuses to stop. June 22nd, 1941. By every measure available to the men who launched it, the invasion was going exactly as planned. The Soviet Air Force was gone. The Soviet border defenses were shattered. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were already in captivity. Stalin was paralyzed. The road east was open. And somewhere in the back of a German staff car, an unshipped box of winter uniforms sat in a warehouse in Poland, waiting for a war that was supposed to be over before it would ever be needed. 5 weeks behind schedule, 19 miles short of Moscow, and 4 million men walking into the longest road they would ever travel. None of them knew the destination yet. But the destination knew them. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a battlefield after a great victory. It is not the silence of peace. It is heavier than that, weighted with the specific exhaustion of men who have been moving fast and killing efficiently and winning in ways that confirm everything they were told about themselves. It is the silence of soldiers who have stopped long enough to look at what they have done and feel for a brief moment. Watch that the world makes sense. In late July 1941, that silence settles over Army Group Center. The Minsk pocket has been liquidated. 300,000 Soviet soldiers are gone, dead or marching west into captivity. The roads east are open. The weather is perfect, dry and warm, the kind of Russian summer that seems designed specifically to accommodate armored warfare. And somewhere ahead, 300 kilometers further east, sits the city that will end this war. Moscow. Guderian knows this. He has known it since the first day, known it with the particular clarity of a man who understands armor, the way a musician understands his instrument. He is standing over his maps, and what he sees is not complicated. The road is open. The enemy's Western armies are shattered. The capital is within reach. And every day he stands here, every hour spent in consolidation and supply, in the bureaucratic friction of a military machine this large, worries a day that Moscow has to breathe. He goes to see Hitler. The meeting takes place at Hitler's forward headquarters in East Prussia, a compound of concrete bunkers and wooden buildings surrounded by pine forest that the staff have taken to calling the Wolf's Lair. Hitler receives Guderian in a room dominated by a massive map table, the entire Eastern Front laid out in colored pins in pencil lines that tell a story of astonishing success. Guderian lays out his case with the precision of a man who has spent his professional life thinking about nothing else. Moscow is the hub of the entire Soviet transportation network, he explains. Every major rail line in the country radiates from Moscow like spokes from a wheel. Capture the city, and you cut the Soviet Union's ability to move troops and supplies across its vast territory. Moscow is also the political center. Capture Stalin's capital, and the regime may collapse entirely. When at minimum, we shatter their ability to coordinate resistance. We must go now, while the roads are dry and the enemy is broken. I can be there in 6 weeks. Hitler listens. He does not interrupt. When Guderian finishes, Hitler looks at the map for a long moment, then looks up. My generals know nothing about the economics of war, he says. The words land in the room like stones dropped into still water. Ukraine has the grain we need to feed our people. Beyond Ukraine lie the oil fields of the Caucasus. Without that oil, this war ends badly, regardless of whether we take Moscow. We must secure these resources. Kiev falls first. Then we turn north. Guderian tries again. He is not a man who surrenders arguments easily. The calendar, my Führer. We have perhaps 12 more weeks of good campaigning weather. If we go to Kiev, we lose those weeks. Moscow will still be there in September, but the October mud will not wait. Hitler cuts him off. The Red Army is finished. They cannot recover from the losses they have already taken. We have time. We will destroy the Kiev pocket, then take Moscow before winter. Guderian flies back to his headquarters. He sits in his command vehicle for a long time without speaking to anyone. He is not a man given to sentiment or self-pity. He is perhaps the finest armored commander of his generation, a man who has spent 20 years thinking about how to use tanks to win wars quickly and decisively. And he has just watched the single greatest opportunity of the entire campaign close like a door shutting in his face. Later in his memoirs, he will write about this moment with the flat precision of a man trying very hard not to let his feelings show between the lines. The feelings show anyway. August 23, 1941. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group turns south, away from Moscow. The panzers that were aimed at the Soviet capital reverse their direction and begin moving toward Ukraine. Dust clouds rise from the roads as thousands of vehicles change course. The entire massive machine of Army Group Center's armored fist redirecting itself toward a different objective. To the south, Army Group South's 1st Panzer Group is already driving north. The plan is elegant in the way that the best military plans are elegant, simple enough to execute, ambitious enough to matter. 2 armored groups, one driving south from the Smolensk, one driving north from Ukraine, will meet east of Kiev, by closing a pocket around the 4 Soviet armies defending the city. On September 16, 1941, Guderian's panzers driving south meet Kleist's panzers driving north at a small town east of Kiev. The jaws close. Trapped inside are the Soviet Fifth Army, the 21st Army, the 26th Army, and the 37th Army. 500,000 men, the largest encirclement in the history of warfare. Soviet commander Mikhail Kurponos had seen it coming for weeks. He had sent message after message to Moscow, begging Stalin to authorize a retreat from Kiev while there was still time to save the armies. Pull back across the Dnieper. Save the men. Abandon the city. Stalin's response was always the same. Not one step back from Kiev. The city bore his name and spirit. Abandoning it would be admitting defeat, would damage Soviet morale, would hand Hitler a propaganda victory. So the army stayed, and now they are surrounded. What follows over the next 10 days is systematic annihilation. German infantry tightens the noose. The Luftwaffe bombs any concentration of Soviet forces. Soviet troops assault the perimeter in waves, some breaking through in small groups, most dying trying. Kurponos tries to lead a breakout personally. A German artillery shell kills him on September 20th. His staff officers die beside him. By September 26th, it is over. 500,000 Soviet soldiers killed or captured. Entire divisions cease to exist as organized units. Mountains of equipment abandoned or destroyed. Thousands of artillery pieces, hundreds of tanks. In Hitler's headquarters, champagne flows. Congratulatory messages travel between generals. The greatest tactical victory in the history of warfare. And they are not wrong. As a tactical achievement, Kiev is without precedent. 500,000 men destroyed in 10 days. Nothing in the annals of warfare matches it for sheer scale. But there is a cost that nobody in those headquarters is counting. The calendar. It is September 26, 1941. Autumn has arrived. Moscow is still 300 kilometers away, exactly where it was on the day Guderian turned his panzers south. 6 weeks have been spent achieving the greatest encirclement in history. 6 weeks of perfect summer weather, the last 6 weeks of campaigning weather that the Eastern Front will offer in 1941. Guderian's prediction sits in the air over every German headquarters like smoke that will not clear. We could have been in Moscow before the mud came. Klaus does not think about Moscow when he thinks about Kiev. He thinks about the prisoners. He has been thinking about the prisoners since Minsk, since that first enormous column of Soviet soldiers shuffling west with their hands raised or folded behind their heads. So many of them that they seem less like an army than a migration. An entire people in motion toward an uncertain destination. He has heard things about the prisoner camps. Not officially. Officially, there is nothing to hear. But soldiers talk, the way soldiers have always talked, in the spaces between orders, in the hours before sleep, in the particular quiet that settles over men who have seen something they cannot fully describe. The camps are not good places. This is the cleanest way Klaus can formulate what he has heard. Of the 2.5 million Soviet soldiers taken prisoner in 1941, most will not survive to see 1943. They will die of starvation, disease, exposure, and deliberate murder in German camps across occupied Soviet territory. They will die at a rate that has no precedent in the modern history of warfare. A rate that reflects not logistical failure, but deliberate policy, the racial ideology that drove this invasion applied with bureaucratic efficiency to the men who surrendered. So Klaus does not know the numbers. He will never know the numbers. But he knows in the part of himself that he has learned to stop listening to that something is deeply wrong. He writes home. The letters are shorter now than they were in June. He says less about what he has seen. He asks more questions about home, about the neighborhood, about whether the garden is producing well this year. He does not ask when he thinks he will be back. He has stopped making that prediction. In the north, another catastrophe is unfolding in slow motion. September 8, 1941. Army Group North completes its encirclement of Leningrad. The city, built by Peter the Great as Russia's window to Europe, home to 3 million people, the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution, is surrounded. German forces hold the southern and western approaches. Finnish forces, Germany's ally eager to reclaim territory lost in the Winter War, have advanced from the north. Lake Ladoga lies to the east, and on its far shore, ex-Soviet territory but cut off as effectively as if the Germans held it. Field Marshal von Lieb requests permission to storm the city. His troops are ready. The defenses can be breached. Leningrad can be taken. Hitler says no. We will not storm Leningrad. We will surround it, cut off all supply, and starve it into submission. The city will fall on its own. We will not waste German lives in urban combat. The calculation seems sound. 3 million people need food, water, fuel, medicine. A cut-off supply, and they will surrender in weeks, a month at most. Hitler miscalculates. What he cannot account for, because his entire ideological framework tells him that Slavic people lack the spiritual fortitude for it, is what happens when you try to starve a city that decides it would rather die than surrender. By November, the daily bread ration in Leningrad has been cut to 125 grams per person. 4 thin slices. That is the total food allocation for an entire day. And it is not real bread. It is sawdust mixed with a small percentage of flour, cellulose, wallpaper paste, anything that can be compressed into a shape that resembles bread. 11,000 people die of starvation in Leningrad in November 1941 alone. People collapse in the streets. Bodies lie on sidewalks where they fell. Nobody has the strength to move them. The living step around the dead and keep walking. Ivan has a mother in Leningrad. He has been trying to get word to her through channels that mostly do not exist anymore. He has heard nothing back. He does not allow himself to think about what that silence means. He puts it in the same place he puts everything else that cannot be dealt with right now and keeps moving east, keeps fighting, keeps doing the only thing that feels like it might eventually connect back to the things he cannot think about. He fights. September 30th, 1941. Operation Typhoon begins. Moscow. Finally, after the detour to Kiev, after 6 weeks of the best campaigning weather, sacrificed to the greatest encirclement in history, Army Group Center turns its full attention to the Soviet capital. The force assembled is enormous even by the standards of this war. Guderian's panzers have returned from the south, more than 70 divisions, nearly 2 million men. They have a 2-to-1 advantage in troops, 3-to-1 in aircraft. Better tanks, better training, better commanders. Not Moscow is 300 kilometers away. The German soldiers believe this is the final push. Take Moscow. The Soviet government collapses. The war ends. Home for Christmas. The operation begins with the same geometry that worked at Minsk and Kiev. Panzer pincers, encirclement, pocket elimination. October 7th, German panzers meet at Vyazma, west of Moscow. Another massive encirclement, 600,000 more Soviet troops trapped. In Moscow, panic sets in. So government ministries begin evacuating to Kuibyshev, 800 kilometers to the east. Foreign embassies pack their files and leave. The Kremlin ships its archives east by train. Stalin's personal train is prepared, ready to carry him to safety. He does not board it. On October 19th, Stalin announces that he is staying in Moscow. If the city falls, he falls with it. The announcement goes out across the city, across the country, carried by radio to soldiers fighting in the snow and workers digging anti-tank ditches with their bare hands. Stalin is staying. The effect on morale is immediate and electric. If the leader will not leave, then the city will not fall. But morale, as the next weeks will demonstrate with brutal clarity, does not stop panzers. October 8th, 1941. It starts raining, not a shower, not a brief autumn storm that passes in an afternoon and leaves the roads wet but passable. The Rasputitsa has arrived. The Russian word means, roughly, the season when roads become impossible. The roads turn to liquid, not softened ground, not difficult terrain. Actual flowing mud, deep and bottomless, the consistency of wet concrete, but with none of the structural integrity. Trucks sink to their axles and cannot be pulled out. Horses drown trying to haul artillery pieces. Tanks bog down and sit at odd angles like toys dropped by a bored child. The German advance slows from 50 kilometers a day to 5, and then to 2, some days to nothing at all. Klaus is walking the way he has been walking since June, and now the walking is a different kind of hell than it was in summer. Every step requires effort. The mud pulls at his boots with personal malice, sucking them down, releasing them only reluctantly. The sound of it a wet slap that follows every step like a slow handclap of mockery. His uniform is wet through. He cannot remember the last time he was dry. He cannot remember the last time he was warm. The Luftwaffe can barely operate. Airfields have turned to swamps. Planes struggle to take off and have nowhere to land when they do. The supply convoys that should take hours now take days. Food becomes scarce. Ammunition runs low. The entire German war machine grinds to a crawl in the Russian mud. Zhukov uses the time. He had been appointed commander of the Moscow defense in October. Stalin's acknowledgement that the situation required his best remaining general. Zhukov arrives in the capital and assesses the situation with the brutal honesty that is his most valuable professional quality. "We are in serious trouble," he tells Stalin, "but we can hold if we act now." He orders the mobilization of Moscow's entire civilian population for defensive construction. Everyone who can hold a shovel will dig. Anti-tank ditches 15 feet deep, ringing the city in 3 successive lines. Concrete bunkers, minefields, artillery positions pre-registered on every likely German approach route. Women, elderly men, teenagers, hundreds of thousands of Muscovites work through October and into November in rain and cold, building the defenses that may be the only thing standing between their city and destruction. Late October, the rain stops, the ground begins to freeze. For the German advance, this is initially good news. Frozen ground is passable. The vehicles can move. The supply lines begin to function again, inadequately but better than during the mud. The offensive resumes. But Soviet resistance is fiercer now. Every village is contested. Every hill is fought over. Every kilometer costs more than the kilometer before it. The defenders are fighting for their capital, and there is a different quality to the resistance, a density of determination that the Germans have not encountered at the same intensity anywhere in the previous 4 months. By early November, Army Group Center is 50 miles from Moscow. Close, agonizingly close. But the advance is slow, and the casualties are mounting at a rate that the Wehrmacht's replacement system cannot sustain. And then the real winter arrives. Late November 1941. The temperature drops with the abruptness of a door slamming shut. -10 degrees Celsius, then -20, then -30. By early December, the thermometers read -40. The German army is wearing summer uniforms. This is the detail that, even now, defies easy comprehension. Not because the German military failed to plan for winter, but because the planning that existed was never executed. The winter clothing sitting in warehouses in Germany and Poland, the felt boots and insulated coats and fur-lined gloves, was never shipped forward because no one expected it to be needed. The campaign would be over by autumn. Yet rail capacity that might have carried winter uniforms was used for ammunition and fuel, and the 1,000 other things a 2-million-man army needs to keep moving forward. Now, as the temperature falls below anything the human body can process without protection, German soldiers stuff newspapers inside their tunics for insulation. They cut blankets into strips and wind them around their boots. They burn furniture from captured farmhouses to stay warm enough to sleep. They wake up and find their water bottles have frozen solid inside their tents. Frostbite spreads through the German ranks like a second army attacking from within. Soldiers wake unable to feel their feet. Fingers turn white, then black. In the field hospitals, surgeons amputate toes, fingers, entire hands, working by flashlight because there is no electricity, their breath fogging the cold air above each operation. In some divisions, frostbite casualties exceed combat casualties. The cold destroys equipment with the same indifference with which it destroys men. Tank engines will not start. The oil freezes solid overnight. German crews build fires under their tanks in the morning to warm the engines, sometimes successfully, sometimes setting the tank ablaze. Vehicle batteries die in the cold. Rubber seals crack. Weapons jam. The bolt on a rifle freezes in place. A machine gun stops firing mid-burst. Artillery recoil mechanisms seize. Hundreds of thousands of horses, mice still pulling the supply wagons and artillery pieces of an army that is more 19th century than 20th in its logistics, begin dying. They freeze standing in their harness. Soldiers wake to find their horses dead and rigid in the darkness, still attached to the equipment they were pulling when the cold took them. Klaus wraps his feet in rags torn from a dead Soviet soldier's coat and keeps moving. He does not write home anymore. And then comes the moment. Late November 1941, when elements of the 258th Infantry Division reach the town of Khimki on the northern outskirts of Moscow. They are close enough to see the city, close enough that some soldiers claim, looking through binoculars on a clear day, to see the golden domes of the Kremlin catching the winter light. They take photographs of road signs. Moscow, 30 kilometers, 19 miles. This is the closest any German force will ever come to the Soviet capital. Klaus is not at Khimki. He is with a different unit. A few kilometers south, fighting through a village that has changed hands 3 times in the last week. But he hears about it. Every German soldier near Moscow hears about it. 19 miles, one more push. The city is right there. The push does not happen. The men making it do not have the strength. They have been fighting continuously since June. They have walked 1,000 kilometers. They are frozen, starving, evaporating on the last reserves of physical and psychological endurance that the human body can produce. Their ammunition is running low. Their vehicles mostly do not work. Their horses are dead. They can see Moscow. They cannot reach it. December 4th, 1941. The German High Command orders a final assault. Everything that remains, all the strength that can be gathered from all the units across the entire Moscow front. Take the city or die trying. The assault gains nothing. Seems Soviet defenses are too strong. German troops too weakened. The cold too absolute. That night, December 4th into December 5th, the temperature plunges to minus 40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers in forward positions freeze to death in their foxholes. Sentries collapse at their posts and are found solid in the morning. Medical officers report that uniforms have frozen to their occupants' skin, that moving wounded soldiers tears flesh from bone. At dawn on December 5th, field commanders across the Moscow front send the same report upward through the chain of command. We cannot continue. General von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, reluctantly transmits the order. Halt the offensive. Consolidate positions. Wait for spring. The dream of Moscow in 1941 dies in the snow 19 miles from the Kremlin. But the German generals still believe they understand what has happened. They came close. They nearly had it. The mud and the cold and the supply failures stopped them, not Soviet strength. Come spring, rested and resupplied, they will finish the job. They have no idea what is about to arrive. Because while the German army has been exhausting itself against Moscow's defenses, Zhukov has been preparing. And now comes the moment that changes everything. The moment that, looking back, marks the precise point where the arc of this war bends permanently in a new direction. His name was Richard Sorge. He was a Soviet intelligence officer operating in Tokyo, undercover as a German journalist. He was, by any measure, one of the most effective spies of the 20th century, a man who had worked his way into the highest levels of Japanese government and military circles and who had been sending Moscow detailed intelligence for years. All through the summer and autumn of 1941, Stalin had been keeping 30 divisions in the Soviet Far East, more than 500,000 men, tanks, artillery, aircraft, an entire army group sitting in Siberia, guarding the eastern border against a Japanese attack that might come at any moment. Japan and the Soviet Union shared a border in Manchuria. They had fought a brief but savage border war there in 1939. Stalin could not afford to strip the eastern defenses while the threat remained real. Those 30 divisions could not come west, not until Sorge sent his message. In October 1941, the message arrived in Moscow. So Sorge had sources at the highest levels of the Japanese government. His intelligence was rock solid. The message was clear. Japan will not attack the Soviet Union. Their military has made a strategic decision to move south, toward the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, toward British Malaya, toward confrontation with the United States. Not north, not into Siberia. Stalin trusts Sorge. He is one of the few intelligence sources Stalin actually believes. And in this moment, with Moscow under threat and the German army 19 miles from the Kremlin, Sorge's message is worth more than any weapon in the Soviet arsenal. Stalin makes his decision immediately. Strip the Far Eastern defenses, send everything west. 30 divisions begin moving along the Trans-Siberian Railway. 6,000 kilometers from the Pacific to Moscow. 500,000 men in transit across the width of a continent. These are not raw recruits. They are experienced soldiers. They're battle-hardened from the border conflicts with Japan, trained in winter warfare, and they are equipped for the cold. Quilted jackets, felt boots, white camouflage suits. These are men from Siberia. They know what minus 40 degrees means, and they know how to function in it. By early December, they are arriving at Moscow. Zhukov has positioned them behind the defensive lines, out of sight of German reconnaissance, in the forests and villages west of the capital. When he has assembled around them a counteroffensive force of staggering size, 1 million men, 7,000 artillery pieces, 1,000 tanks, more than 1,000 aircraft. The Germans have no idea these forces exist. Their intelligence has completely failed to detect the buildup. They think the Red Army is finished. They think Soviet reserves are exhausted. They are wrong in ways they cannot yet comprehend. December 5, 1941. Pre-dawn. Hanoi, the same morning that German field commanders are sending their reports that the offensive must halt. Soviet artillery opens fire along a 200-mile front. Katyusha rocket launchers, Stalin's organs, the Germans call them for the screaming sound the rockets make, unleash salvo after salvo. 32 rockets in 10 seconds, each salvo landing across an area large enough to obliterate a battalion's defensive position. German soldiers in summer uniforms huddle in frozen foxholes and have nowhere to go as the shells arrive. Then the tanks come, T-34s by the hundreds, their wide tracks designed for exactly this terrain, their diesel engines starting reliably in cold that has made German tank engines useless, surge forward through the winter landscape. Behind the tanks, Soviet infantry moves in white winter camouflage, some on skis crossing the snow at speed, others on foot but properly equipped, properly fed, properly motivated by the specific fury of men defending their own country from people who have come to destroy it. The contrast is total. Soviet soldiers prepared for winter, German soldiers freezing in summer uniforms. The German line breaks. Not everywhere, not immediately, but the shock is profound. Where did all these Russians come from? We destroyed their armies. We took millions of prisoners. How can they still be attacking? Panic spreads through German units in a way that has not been seen since the beginning of the campaign. Some units hold their ground and fight with everything they have. Others retreat without orders. Ivan is in the counteroffensive. He has been fighting since June, has survived encirclements and retreats, and the kind of grinding defensive combat that destroys units from the inside. He is thinner than he was in June. He is harder. When he has learned things about himself that he would have preferred not to learn. He is moving west now, for the first time since the war began, and there is something in that direction, something in the simple fact of advancing rather than retreating, that feels like a physical change in the air, like a pressure that has been building since June has finally found somewhere to go. He does not know about Sorge, or he does not know about the Trans-Siberian Railway, or the 30 divisions, or the intelligence operation that made this moment possible. He knows only that he is moving forward and the enemy is moving back, and that somewhere ahead of him, in the wreckage of a war that has been consuming men since June, the city of Kharkov is under German occupation. Ivan's wife and daughter are there. He puts that thought in the place where he keeps all the things that cannot be dealt with now and keeps moving west. The counteroffensive continues for 7 days straight, December 5th through December 12th. Relentless Soviet attacks across the full width of Army Group Center's front. German forces push back 50 to 150 kilometers in different sectors. Towns that fell to Germany in October and November are recaptured. For the first time since June 22nd, the Wehrmacht is going backward. The myth of German invincibility, the story that has been the foundation of everything since Poland, shatters in the snow outside Moscow. December 19th, 1941. Hitler dismisses the commander-in-chief of the German army and announces that he is assuming personal command of all German ground forces. A World War I corporal now directly commands the largest army on earth. His generals are horrified and silent. Nobody objects. Hitler immediately begins purging the officer corps. Guderian is dismissed for requesting permission to withdraw to defensible positions. Hübner is stripped of rank for ordering a tactical retreat without permission. Von Bock is allowed to resign for health reasons. Von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group South, is dismissed for requesting a withdrawal from an exposed position. 35 senior officers fired, reassigned, or forced out in 2 weeks. The message is clear. There will be no retreats. There will be no withdrawals. There will be no reality-based assessments of what the German army is actually capable of in this moment. And then Hitler issues the order that may have saved the German army from complete collapse, even as it plants the seed of every catastrophe that will follow. The stand-fast order. No retreat, no withdrawal. German forces will hold their positions regardless of the cost. Officers who order retreats without Hitler's personal permission will face court-martial. Every village becomes a fortress. Every town held to the last man. Stand and die where you are. It seems insane. Hold positions at -40 degrees in summer uniforms with no ammunition and no air support against an enemy attacking with overwhelming force, simply because Adolf Hitler has decided that retreat is ideologically unacceptable. But it works. The panic stops. As units that were beginning to dissolve find discipline again, the network of fortified positions creates resistance that the Soviet counteroffensive cannot completely break. By late December, the German line has stabilized, pushed back significantly, no longer 19 miles from Moscow, but 60 or 70 miles in some sectors. The line, however, holds. Hitler learns the wrong lesson. He believes his iron will save the German army. He believes that his refusal to permit retreat, his willingness to demand the impossible from his soldiers, is what prevented total collapse. He will apply this doctrine again. He will apply it at Stalingrad. He will apply it every time reality presents him with an outcome he does not wish to accept. And each time, the cost will be higher. January 1942. Stalin, emboldened by the success of the Moscow counteroffensive, makes a decision that Zhukov will later describe as the most expensive mistake of the entire winter campaign. He orders a general offensive across the entire Eastern Front. From Leningrad in the north to the Caucasus in the south, every Soviet army will attack simultaneously. The Germans are beaten, demoralized, retreating. Now is the time to finish them. Zhukov objects with the controlled urgency of a man who knows he is right and knows also that being right is not sufficient protection. Comrade Stalin, he says carefully, we achieved our success at Moscow through concentration of force. We massed troops in one sector and overwhelmed the enemy. If we spread across 3,000 kilometers, we will not have decisive superiority anywhere. The Germans will hold their hedgehog positions. We will take heavy casualties for minimal gain. Stalin dismisses this. The order goes out. From January through April 1942, Soviet armies attack everywhere and achieve decisive results nowhere. The German hedgehog defenses prove resilient. Small garrisons in fortified villages hold out for weeks against overwhelming numbers. The casualties are appalling, but both sides are bleeding, and the bleeding is not equal. Germany loses veterans it cannot replace. The Red Army loses more men, but the Red Army has more men to lose. And the men who survive are learning, battle by battle, the hard and expensive curriculum of modern warfare. By April, both sides are exhausted. The spring mud season arrives and stops everyone equally. The fighting tapers off. The front stabilizes. Both armies settle into their positions and wait for the ground to dry. And in Berlin, Hitler looks at his maps and begins planning for summer. He has learned one lesson from the failure of 1941. He cannot attack everywhere. Germany does not have the strength for that anymore. He must choose his objectives and concentrate his force. He knows what those objectives must be. Oil. Germany is running out of oil. Without oil, the panzers are useless steel. The Luftwaffe is grounded. The Navy is harbor decoration. Germany loses the war by default, not on the battlefield, but in the fuel depots, as the tanks run dry and the planes stay on the ground. The Soviet Union has oil. The Caucasus oil fields, Maikop, Grozny, Baku, produce 80% of Soviet petroleum. Capture those fields and Germany solves its fuel crisis, while simultaneously crippling the Soviet war machine. Operation Blue takes shape. One of the summer offensive of 1942. Focused, purposeful, aimed at the one objective that actually matters for Germany's survival. And somewhere in the planning, Somewhere in the meetings and the map sessions and the late nights in the wolf's lair, Hitler's eye falls on a name, a city on the Volga River, Stalingrad. It produces tanks and tractors. It controls river traffic on the Volga. It is important in a logistical sense, not critical, but important. But that is not why the name catches Hitler's attention. The city bears his enemy's name, Stalingrad, Stalin's city, renamed in 1925 to honor his defense of it during the Civil War. For Hitler, the symbolism is irresistible. Capture the city bearing Stalin's name. Humiliate the man across the table. Show the Soviet people that their leader cannot protect even the thing that carries his name. His generals look at the maps and feel again, in the cold anxiety of men who cannot say out loud what they know to be true. Stalingrad is not on the road to the oil fields. Stalingrad is a detour, and detours in Russia in this war have a way of becoming graves. But no one says this out loud. Klaus is moving south with his unit toward a city he has never heard of, in a war that was supposed to be over a year ago. He is thinner than he was in June 1941. He is quieter. He has stopped writing letters home, not because he has nothing to say, but because he has learned that the things he has to say are not things he wants his mother to know about. Ivan is moving south too, in a different uniform and from a different direction, toward the same city. They will not meet. They will never meet. They will fight in the same streets, in the same buildings, sometimes within a single wall's thickness of each other, and never exchange a word. But they are both heading toward the same place, toward a city that neither of them chose, and that neither of them wants, that two men sitting in distant headquarters have decided must be the center of the world. The summer of 1942 is warm and dry, exactly like the summer of 1941. The roads are good, the panzers are moving, and somewhere ahead, the Volga River is running brown and wide in the August heat, flowing past a city that has been given a destiny by men who think that destiny is theirs to assign. The meat grinder is waiting, and it is very, very hungry. There is a Russian word that has no precise English equivalent. Stoyat. It means to stand, but not the ordinary standing of a man waiting for a bus or pausing in a doorway. It means to stand when everything in the physical world is telling you to fall. To stand when the ground beneath you is on fire. To stand when the man beside you has just stopped standing and will never stand again. To stand not because you believe you will survive, but because the alternative is to give the thing in front of you exactly what it wants. By August 1942, the people defending Stalingrad had learned this word in the only way it can actually be learned. They had learned it in their bodies. The city that General Friedrich Paulus's Sixth Army approached in late August 1942 stretched 12 miles along the western bank of the Volga River. Before the war, it had been an industrial city of 400,000 people, famous for its tractor factory, its steel plants, its grain elevators rising above the river like monuments to Soviet productivity. It was not a beautiful city. It was a working city, the kind of place built for purpose rather than appearance, all brick and concrete in the particular aesthetic of Soviet industrial ambition. None of that remained by the time the assault began. On the night of August 23, 1942, 600 Luftwaffe aircraft arrived over Stalingrad in waves. Their bombs were incendiary, designed not to destroy specific targets, but to burn everything. The wooden residential neighborhoods that made up much of the city caught first, entire streets becoming rivers of fire in minutes, the flames merging into something larger than any individual fire, a firestorm that created its own wind, pulling oxygen toward the center, or turning the night sky over the Volga a shade of red that soldiers on both sides of the front could see from 50 kilometers away. 40,000 civilians died that night. Klaus was among the soldiers watching the horizon glow from positions west of the city. He had seen cities burn before. Warsaw had burned. Minsk had burned. But this was different in scale, different in quality, the kind of destruction that seems to exceed the technical capacity of the weapons producing it, as if the city itself had decided to participate in its own annihilation. He did not know yet that the destruction he was watching would make his job infinitely harder. Ivan was inside the city when the bombs came. He had been there for 3 weeks, part of the garrison holding the western approaches. And he had developed the urban fighter's instinct for shelter, the rapid calculation of which walls were thick enough, which cellars deep enough, which angles of approach would keep a man alive for another few minutes. When the firestorm began, he went underground and stayed there, in a sewer junction beneath the factory district, listening to the world above him dissolve. When he came up the next morning, he stood in the ruins and understood something that the German commanders planning the assault had not yet grasped. Rubble, he thought, is not a destroyed city. Rubble is a fortress. The collapsed walls created firing positions with perfect fields of fire and no sight lines for the attacker. The broken buildings provided covered movement routes that no map could show and no aerial reconnaissance could decode. The cellars and sewers created an underground network that would allow defenders to appear and disappear in ways that would drive attacking infantry to the edge of madness. The Luftwaffe had just built the perfect defensive terrain. Its General Vasily Chuikov commanded the 62nd Army inside Stalingrad. His headquarters was a bunker on the Volga riverbank, close enough to the front that German artillery regularly dropped shells on it, close enough to the river that when the Germans advanced to within 100 meters of the bank, Chuikov's staff could hear the German officers giving orders. He was not a gentle man or a patient one. He was profane, direct, and possessed of a tactical intelligence shaped entirely by the specific problem in front of him rather than by doctrine or precedent. And the specific problem in front of him was this: the Germans had better everything. Better artillery support, better air support, better logistics, better equipment, better tactical coordination. In open terrain, or even in intact urban terrain, they would win. So Chuikov eliminated the terrain. Hug the Germans, he told his men. They have to get so close they cannot use their advantages. Close enough that the Luftwaffe cannot bomb without killing Germans. Close enough that German artillery cannot fire without hitting their own troops. Close enough that their superior coordination becomes a liability rather than an asset. What this meant in practice was combat at ranges measured not in meters, but in arm lengths. The battle for a single building could last 2 weeks. Germans would take the ground floor. Soviets would hold the second floor. Both sides would occupy the same stairwell simultaneously, throwing grenades through doors, firing through ceilings, communicating by the sounds of movement overhead or the shadow visible under a door. The concept of a front line became meaningless. There was no front line. There was only the next room, the next floor, the next wall, and the question of who was on the other side of it. A German officer wrote in his diary, and his words were found after the war in the ruins of what had been a command post. We have fought for 15 days for a single house. The front is a corridor between burned-out rooms. It is the length of a human body from the enemy. Klaus was in that corridor. He had been in Stalingrad for 6 weeks by October, and he had aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. He had learned to move through rubble with the specific economy of a man who has calculated exactly how much energy he has left and exactly how much he will need to stay alive until dark. He had learned to sleep in 10-minute intervals, never more. Never in the same place twice. He had learned the sound difference between a sniper's shot and suppressive fire, between a grenade landing close and one landing close enough. He had stopped thinking about June 1941. He was thinking about the next 30 seconds, and then the 30 seconds after that, and that was the full extent of his relationship with the future. The Soviet snipers were among the most psychologically effective weapons of the entire battle. They hid in the ruins for hours at a time, sometimes days, motionless under debris or inside collapsed walls, waiting with a patience that the German military had no cultural framework for understanding. A German officer would expose himself for 3 seconds to observe his sector and die before he heard the shot. A soldier would light a cigarette in what he believed was a covered position and be dead before the smoke cleared. The most celebrated of them was a young man named Vasily Zaitsev, a shepherd from the Ural Mountains, who had grown up hunting in conditions that made him almost incomprehensibly patient and accurate. In Stalingrad, he became something beyond a marksman. The Soviet propaganda apparatus understood what he represented and turned him into a symbol, printing his photograph in newspapers, broadcasting stories about his duels with German snipers, creating a mythology around him that served a purpose beyond the military value of his kills. The mythology said, "We have men who are better than you at the things you pride yourselves on. We have men who will hunt you in the ruins of the city you destroyed, and you will never hear them coming." Klaus had learned not to present himself as a target. He had learned this the way most lessons in Stalingrad were learned, by watching the man in front of him stop moving. Every night across the Volga, the river was under constant German artillery fire from positions on the western bank. German aircraft patrolled it during daylight, but every night in the darkness, boats and barges made the crossing. Engines were cut well upstream to avoid detection. Men rowed or let the current carry them, lying flat to reduce their silhouette, listening for the sound of German guns registering on their position. Some crossings were illuminated by German flares, and the men in the boats lay perfectly still and waited, understanding that any movement in that suspended, terrible light was the last movement they would ever make. Some boats were hit, some sank. Soldiers drowned in the cold water, dragged down by their equipment, swallowed by the dark river. But most made it. Fresh divisions, fed across from the eastern bank, took positions beside units that had been reduced to a few dozen men, replenishing the defense, keeping Chukhov's grip on the western bank from being simply ground away to nothing. Ivan made the crossing 3 times, moving between the eastern and western banks as his unit was rotated in and out of the combat zone. Each crossing felt like passing through a door that might not open from the other side. He began to think of the Volga not as a river, but as a threshold, something that separated the world where ordinary human calculations applied from the world on the western bank where they did not. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was 24 hours. Ivan was aware of this statistic, not as a piece of information he had been told, but as a felt reality, something that the arithmetic of his unit's losses confirmed daily. He had stopped attaching significance to the fact that he was still alive. He thought about his daughter. He thought about her in the specific, deliberate way that a man thinks about something he cannot afford to feel fully, keeping the image small and contained, taking it out only for a moment before putting it back. He did not let himself think about whether she was still alive. By November 1942, the Germans controlled 80% of Stalingrad. The Soviet-held territory was compressed into narrow strips along the Volga, in some places barely 500 meters deep. The tractor factory had fallen. The barricades gun factory was contested room by room. Chukhov's headquarters had been forced to relocate twice when German forces got close enough to threaten it directly. The 62nd Army was bleeding from every surface, and yet it held, not because it was strong, because it refused to stop. And while Paulus's 6th Army ground itself against this refusal, while German resources and German lives poured into the blocks and rubble of a city that was consuming everything thrown at it, something was being built outside the city that no one inside it yet knew about. Zhukov stood over maps in Moscow and saw what the German commanders inside Stalingrad could not see because their faces were pressed too close to the thing they were trying to break. He saw the flanks. North of Stalingrad, but the German 6th Army's northern flank was held by the Romanian 3rd Army. South of the city, the Romanian 4th Army held the southern flank. The Romanians were Germany's allies in this war, soldiers who had been placed in these positions because Germany did not have enough men to hold the entire line with its own forces. They were poorly equipped. Their anti-tank guns were obsolete, unable to penetrate the armor of Soviet T-34s at combat ranges. When their morale was the morale of men fighting far from home for someone else's objectives, which is a different quality of motivation than the morale of men fighting in the ruins of their own country. Zhukov's plan was called Operation Uranus. 2 simultaneous attacks, one from the north, smashing through the Romanian 3rd Army, one from the south smashing through the Romanian 4th Army. The 2 attacking forces would drive toward each other and meet west of Stalingrad. The 6th Army, and all of it, Paulus and his 250,000 men, and everything they needed to survive, would be inside the pocket when the jaws closed. For 2 months, the Soviets assembled the forces for Uranus in total secrecy. Over 1 million men moved at night. Trains arrived in darkness, unloaded, and departed before dawn. Tanks were hidden under haystacks and in forests. Radio silence was absolute. German reconnaissance detected nothing. Their attention was fixed on the grinding combat inside the city. To November 19, 1942, 7:30 in the morning, the Northern Front explodes. 3,500 Soviet guns opened fire on Romanian Third Army positions. 80 minutes of continuous bombardment. When the guns stop and the T-34s begin to move, there is almost nothing left to resist them. Romanian anti-tank guns fire and watch their shells bounce off Soviet armor. The tanks keep coming. Romanian Third Army disintegrates. November 20th, the southern attack begins. Same pattern. Same. Romanian Fourth Army breaks and runs. On November 22nd, 1942, the two Soviet forces meet at Kalak on the Don River. The soldiers who close this trap have studied the maps from Minsk, from Smolensk, from Kiev. They know this geometry because Germany taught it to them. 250,000 German soldiers are now inside the same shape that has swallowed Soviet armies all the way from the Bug River to the Volga. Klaus, somewhere in the pocket, he does not yet know the name of what has just happened to him, but he knows the feeling. Every Soviet soldier who survived 1941 knows this feeling from the other side. The student has passed the examination. The teacher is trapped inside it. Inside the pocket, Paulus sends a message to Hitler. He requests permission to break out while the encirclement is still fresh. While Soviet forces have not yet had time to consolidate their positions, while the Sixth Army still has enough fuel and ammunition to fight its way west, save the army while saving, it is still possible. Hitler's response is immediate and absolute. Sixth Army will hold Stalingrad. Form a circular defense. The Luftwaffe will supply you by air. Relief is being organized. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, standing beside Hitler when the message is composed, has made a promise. The Luftwaffe can supply the Sixth Army. We did it at Demyansk. We can do it here. This promise is a catastrophic fantasy dressed in the language of military confidence. At Demyansk, the Luftwaffe supplied 100,000 men in spring weather over short distances. Stalingrad requires supplying 250,000 men through Russian winter over distances 3 times as long against a Soviet air force that has grown dramatically stronger. The Sixth Army needs 700 tons of supplies per day to sustain itself. On November 24th, the first day of the airlift, the Luftwaffe delivers 30 tons, 4% of what is needed. The pilots are not failing for lack of courage. They are flying into weather that grounds aircraft, into Soviet fighter screens that shoot down transport planes in dozens, onto airfields inside the pocket that are under constant artillery fire. The average daily delivery over the entire siege, 94 tons, less than 14% of requirements. Inside the pocket, the Sixth Army begins to starve. December brought Manstein, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, perhaps the most gifted operational commander in the German military, arrived with the 4th Panzer Army to break through the Soviet encirclement from the south. He had been given the mission of relieving Stalingrad, and he brought to it everything he knew about armored warfare, which was more than almost anyone else alive. What he had not been given was enough tanks. He needed 500, so he had 230. Operation Winter Storm began on December 12th. Manstein's armor drove northeast toward the pocket, smashing through Soviet defensive positions, advancing 20 miles in the first 48 hours. December 15th, he was 40 miles from Stalingrad. December 19th, the advance reached the Mishkova River, just 48 kilometers from the pocket. Close enough that on clear nights, German soldiers in the relief force could see the glow of fires from Stalingrad on the horizon. Manstein sent a message to Paulus. Prepare Operation Thunderclap. Be ready to break out toward my position. We link up and escape together. Paulus faced a choice that has been analyzed and debated by military historians for 80 years. He could break out. The Soviet encirclement was still imperfect in some sectors. The Sixth Army, weakened but not yet destroyed, could fight its way southwest toward Manstein's relief force. Many would die in the attempt. Much equipment would have to be abandoned, but most of the army might survive. Or he could wait for the order that would never come. The order from Hitler permitting the retreat that Hitler would never permit. Paulus sent a request to Hitler's headquarters. Request permission to execute Thunderclap. Hitler's response. Sixth Army will remain in position. Hold Stalingrad. Manstein will reach you. Paulus stayed. Manstein, his flanks now threatened by Soviet counterattacks, his forces outnumbered and being ground down, was forced to retreat on December 26th. The relief force fell back. fighting Soviet pursuit forces every kilometer of the withdrawal, saving itself but leaving the Sixth Army to its fate. Manstein sent a final message to Paulus through unofficial channels. Break out on your own authority. I will take full responsibility with the Führer, but do it now. Paulus considered it. He considered it for a long time. He was a professional officer trained to obey orders, shaped by an institutional culture that measured a man's worth by his reliability, his predictability, his willingness to subordinate personal judgment to the hierarchy above him. His entire career had been built on the principle that officers who follow orders are the foundation of a functioning military. He followed his orders. He stayed. January 1943. Inside the Stalingrad pocket, hell achieves its final form. The airlift has collapsed entirely. Gumrak, the last functioning airfield inside the pocket, falls to Soviet forces on January 16th. The airlift ends. No more supplies in, no more wounded out. The rations have been cut beyond the threshold where numbers mean anything. A man can calculate 100 grams of bread. He cannot calculate what happens to a body that has been given 100 grams of bread and then asked to lift a rifle and defend a position. The body does the calculation for him. The answer is always the same. Men collapse while walking between positions. They lie where they fall and do not get up. Their bodies have consumed themselves past the point where ordinary human recovery is possible. The horses have all been eaten. All of them. Tens of thousands of horses that pulled supply wagons and artillery pieces, butchered and eaten. Then the horses are gone. Soldiers eat anything they can find. Leather belts boiled for hours until they are soft enough to chew. Boot leather, harness straps, glue melted from equipment. In the field hospitals, there is no morphine. There is almost no anesthetic. There are no antibiotics, almost no bandages. Surgeons amputate frozen and gangrenous limbs with handsaws, working by flashlight. And the patients scream because there is nothing to give them. The screams echo through the frozen cellars that serve as hospitals. Most of the wounded do not survive. They die of infections, of shock, of exposure. The dead are stacked outside because the ground is too frozen to dig graves. Klaus is still alive. This fact surprises him when he has enough mental clarity to register it. He is not alive because he is stronger than the men who have died beside him. He is alive through the same arbitrary grace that has kept some men standing in every battle since the beginning of warfare. The grace that has no explanation and offers no guarantees. He writes one final letter. His hands shake so badly that the writing is almost illegible. He writes his mother's name at the top of the page and then sits for a long time with the pen in his hand, trying to find the words for something that he knows cannot be put into words. He writes a few lines about home, about the kitchen, about the sound of Sunday mornings before the war. He does not write about Stalingrad. And he does not write about what he has seen or what he has done or what has been done to the men around him. He folds the letter and puts it in his breast pocket. He will not send it. There is no way to send it now, but the folding feels like something, a gesture toward a world that still exists somewhere, a world of kitchens and Sunday mornings, even if that world is very far away from where he is now. 3 weeks later, Klaus is dead, not from a bullet, when the bullet would have been faster and in its way kinder. He dies of the accumulated weight of everything that has been taken from him since June 1941. The warmth, the food, the certainty that the future exists. His body simply stops, the way a machine stops when the last of its fuel is gone and there is nothing left to burn. He is 26 years old. He is lying in a collapsed building in a city he never wanted to see, in a war that was supposed to end before the snow fell. And he is very cold. And then he is not cold anymore. January 8, 1943. The Soviets offer surrender terms. A delegation approaches German lines under a white flag carrying a formal document. Guaranteed treatment of prisoners according to military convention. Medical care for the wounded. Normal rations. Repatriation after the war. Paulus radios Hitler for permission to accept. Hitler's response? Surrender is forbidden. Sixth Army will fight to the last man and the last bullet. January 10th. Operation Ring begins. 7 Soviet armies attack the pocket from all directions. 5,000 guns firing simultaneously. The perimeter collapses inward, day by day, like a circle being tightened by an invisible hand. January 30th, 1943. Hitler promotes Paulus to field marshal by radio. The promotion is transmitted in the early hours of the morning, a gesture that is also an instruction. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. Hitler was not honoring Paulus, and he was informing him of the expected manner of his death. Paulus reads the promotion order. He sits with it for a long time. Then he folds it and puts it aside. The next morning, January 31st, Soviet troops storm the Univermag department store in central Stalingrad, the building where Paulus has established his final headquarters. They go through the building floor by floor, room by room, with the systematic efficiency of soldiers who have been doing this for 5 months. In the basement, they find Paulus and his staff. He is gaunt. His uniform hangs off a body that has lost a third of its weight. His eyes are sunken and steady. He looks like a man who made a decision some time ago and has been living in the aftermath of it ever since. A Soviet officer steps forward. "Are you General Paulus?" "Field Marshal," Paulus says. "I surrender myself and my staff." He walks out into the cold Stalingrad morning and into Soviet captivity. 91,000 German soldiers follow him. They move in columns through the ruins of the city they tried to take, past the burned-out buildings and the frozen debris, and the evidence of 5 months of fighting that has consumed everything it touched. They look like men who have already died and are simply walking because no one has told them to stop. Of the 91,000 who surrender, only 5,000 will ever return to Germany. The rest will die in Soviet prisoner of war camps over the following years, if from disease and starvation and the particular cruelty that is what remains when two ideologies have spent years teaching their adherents that the people on the other side are not quite human. 300,000 German and Axis soldiers lost at Stalingrad, 300,000 Soviet soldiers and civilians dead. The city that was supposed to be a propaganda victory has consumed more German military strength than any battle in the history of the Wehrmacht. The final reckoning comes at Kursk. Spring 1943. The winter fighting has left a massive bulge in the front lines, the Kursk salient, where Soviet forces have pushed west during their counteroffensives. It protrudes 100 miles into German-held territory, and to Hitler it looks like an opportunity. Attack from the north and south simultaneously. Cut off the salient. Destroy the Soviet forces inside. Another great encirclement, like the victories of 1941. Restore German prestige after Stalingrad. Operation Citadel. But Hitler delays. He wants new weapons. The Tiger tank, with its 88mm gun and near-impenetrable frontal armor. The Panther tank, designed specifically to counter the T-34. He postpones Citadel from April to May, from May to June, finally scheduling it for early July. Every week of delay is a gift to Zhukov. Soviet intelligence is extraordinary now. They have sources inside German headquarters. They know the date, the direction, the units, the objectives. Zhukov knows everything. He makes a decision that is either the most confident or the most reckless thing a commander can do. He lets them come. Don't attack first. Don't disrupt their preparations. Instead, build the most comprehensive defensive system in history. Let the Germans exhaust themselves breaking their armor against Soviet defenses, then counterattack when they are spent. For 6 months, the Kursk salient becomes a fortress. The 8 successive defensive lines, some zones 20 miles deep, 400,000 mines, anti-tank ditches 15 feet deep, 20,000 artillery pieces positioned to create interlocking fields of fire on every likely German approach. And behind all of it, massive reserves of fresh armor and infantry held back, waiting. July 5, 1943, Operation Citadel begins. From the north, Model's 9th Army. From the south, Hoth's 4th Panzer Army. Nearly 3,000 tanks and assault guns, when the largest concentration of German armor ever assembled, moving toward the salient from 2 directions. The northern attack stops almost immediately. Model's forces run into the Soviet defensive system, and the system works exactly as designed. Mines detonate under the lead tanks. Anti-tank guns fire from concealed positions into the flanks and rears of German armor. Artillery registered on approach routes pounds German formations before they can develop momentum. After 6 days of brutal fighting, Ninth Army has gained 6 miles and lost 25,000 men. 6 miles. The southern attack does better. Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, with better commanders and more capable armor, breaks through the first Soviet defensive line, then the second. By July 10th, they have advanced 25 miles into the salient. For a brief moment, a German breakthrough seems possible. July 12th, Prokhorovka. Zhukov releases his reserve, the 5th Guards Tank Army, to 850 tanks, charges straight into the German advance. Soviet tank commander Rotmistrov gives a single order to his crews: close with the enemy. Get so close that the Germans cannot use their superior guns and armor effectively. What follows defies the military vocabulary that was built for smaller catastrophes. Nearly 2,000 armored vehicles fighting across 15 square miles of Russian farmland. Not a battle in the conventional sense, a collision. The kind that leaves both sides unable to move for a moment, stunned by their own violence, before one of them realizes it can still stand and the other cannot. The battlefield fills with smoke from burning tanks, with the dust clouds raised by thousands of sets of tracks, with the continuous percussion of guns firing at ranges where the mathematics of armor penetration no longer require calculation. Soviet T-34s ram German Tigers. Crews abandon burning vehicles and fight each other on foot. The infantry attacks tanks with magnetic mines. By nightfall, the battlefield is carpeted with burning wreckage. The Soviets lose 300 to 400 tanks. The Germans lose 200. Both sides have been savaged. But the Soviets can replace their losses. Germany cannot. July 13th. Hitler calls off Operation Citadel. The offensive has failed. The northern attack gained nothing. The southern attack is stalled at Prokhorovka. The German losses are unsustainable, and the objective is no closer than it was when the attack began. The Wehrmacht begins to withdraw, and before the withdrawal is even complete, the Soviets attack. Operation Kutuzov strikes the northern shoulder of the salient on July 15th. Operation Rumyantsev hits the south. Fresh Soviet armies, held in reserve throughout Citadel, now crash into the exhausted German forces trying to retreat. August 5th, 1943. Soviet forces recapture Kursk. When the Battle of Kursk cost Germany more than 50,000 casualties and 700 tanks. More importantly, Kursk closes a door. From June 1941 through July 1943, 2 years, Germany had launched massive summer offensives. Barbarossa, Operation Blue, Citadel. Each one preceded by the same confidence, the same maps covered in pins and arrows, the same promises about objectives that would end the war. After Kursk, there are no more. From this point forward, the Red Army attacks and the Wehrmacht defends. The momentum that the Wehrmacht carried across the Bug River in June 1941 has been transferred, completely and permanently, to the other side. The rest of the story follows the logic of the moment when that transfer became irreversible. 1943. Ukraine. The Red Army crosses the Dnieper River. Kharkov is liberated for the final time in August. Kiev falls to Soviet forces in November. When Ivan enters Kharkov in August 1943, with the second wave of liberating forces, moving through streets that 2 years of German occupation have made strange and familiar at the same time. He knows where the building is without having to look at street signs. He has walked to it 10,000 times in his head during the years since he left. The building is standing. This alone feels like something he has not earned. He climbs the stairs. He does not allow himself to think about what he will find. He has survived 2 years of war by learning not to think about things before he has to. The door opens. His daughter is 3 years old now. She does not know him. She hides behind her mother's leg and looks at him with the careful assessment of a child encountering a stranger. His wife says his name once, very quietly. He sits down on the floor of the hallway because his legs have stopped working, and after a moment his daughter comes and puts her hand on his arm to see if he is real. He is real. He is here. He did not know until this moment how much he had stopped believing those two things were still possible. He picks her up and holds her and does not speak for a long time. Outside, the war is still going. It will go for 2 more years. He will go back to it tomorrow. But tonight, in a kitchen in Kharkov, with bread on the table and a child asleep in the next room, You even understand something about why men fight that no speech or ideology or order from above has ever been able to explain. You fight for the door that opens. You fight for the child who does not know you yet. You fight so that the kitchen still exists when you come back to it. 1944. The Soviet summer offensive Operation Bagration destroys Army Group Center in 6 weeks, a catastrophe larger in scale than Stalingrad. You're eliminating 28 German divisions and killing or capturing over 500,000 men. Belarus is liberated. The Baltic states are liberated. Romania switches sides. Bulgaria surrenders. Finland exits the war. The front that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea along the Russian border in June 1941 now runs through Poland. January 1945. The Red Army crosses into Germany itself. The war that started on Soviet soil has come home to the country that launched it. And there is a particular quality to this kind of war. The final contraction of a military power being pushed back across everything it had taken. Back through the blood it had spilled. Back through the cities it had burned. Back to the beginning. April 1945. Berlin. Ivan is not with the first units into the city. He comes in with the second wave, moving through streets where the fighting is still happening, and where the last defenders of a regime that killed 60 million people across 12 years are making their final stand in the rubble of their own capital. The city looks, he thinks, like Stalingrad. Not because the architecture is similar, because the rubble is the same, because ruins, he has learned, look the same everywhere. The specific geography of destruction, the collapsed walls and the burned-out interiors, and the debris that was once someone's life scattered across pavements, it is universal. It belongs to no single place or people. He finds it in a street near the old government district. A letter. It is lying in the rubble, partially sheltered by a piece of fallen masonry, which is why it has survived the rain and the fighting. It is written in German, which Ivan cannot read, on paper that has been folded and refolded so many times that the creases are worn through. The handwriting is unsteady. The letters formed with the careful effort of a man whose hands were not fully under his control when he wrote them. Ivan holds it for a long time. He does not know who wrote it. He does not know when. He does not know the name at the top of the page, or the name signed at the bottom, or the words that fill the space between. But he knows the letter. And he knows it the way you know something that you have never seen before, but that answers a question you have been carrying for a long time without knowing what the question was. He knows this letter because he has written this letter. Not these words, not in this language, but the act itself, the reaching across the distance between where you are and where the people who matter to you are, the need to put something on paper when the paper might be the last thing that travels in the direction of home. He puts the letter in his pocket. Somewhere in the chain of decisions that led from the Bug River to Berlin, from June 1941 to April 1945, the smallest link may have been a telegram sent from Tokyo in October 1941. Richard Sorg never knew that his message saved Moscow. He was arrested by Japanese authorities in October 1941, the same month his intelligence reached Stalin, and I tried for espionage and executed in November 1944. He died without knowing whether anyone had believed him. Someone had. The 30 Siberian divisions that crossed the continent on the Trans-Siberian Railway, that arrived at Moscow in December 1941, in their white winter uniforms and their felt boots, that broke the German advance 19 miles from the Kremlin, they came because one man in a foreign city had done his job and one leader had, for once, trusted the intelligence he was given. History turns on stranger things than that. It turns on 5 weeks stolen by a coup in Belgrade, on a general's panzers aimed at the wrong city, on a telegram from Tokyo, on a field marshal who chose surrender over suicide, on a letter found in the rubble of a ruined capital, on a door that opens. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler dies in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery as Soviet shells rain down above. May 2nd. Berlin falls. The Soviet flag rises over the Reichstag. May 8th. Germany surrenders unconditionally. From the Bug River to Berlin. 3 years, 10 months, 10 days. Here is what the final accounting looks like. 27 million Soviet citizens dead, military and civilian combined. a number so large that it resists comprehension, that the mind slides off it the way it slides off any number that exceeds the scale of ordinary human experience. 4 million German soldiers dead on the Eastern Front, when out of 5 million total German military deaths in the entire war, 80% of German military casualties occurred fighting the Soviet Union. The vast majority of German tanks destroyed, aircraft shot down, and divisions annihilated fell on the Eastern Front. D-Day mattered. The liberation of France mattered. The campaigns in North Africa and Italy mattered. Without them, the war would have lasted years longer and cost millions more lives. But the Eastern Front was where the Wehrmacht was destroyed. Everything else was what happened while that destruction was being completed. The question that lingers, the question that every serious examination of Operation Barbarossa eventually arrives at, is not whether Germany could have won. It is whether anyone at any point in the 4 years that followed June 22, 1941, could have made different decisions that would have changed the outcome. 5 weeks. The Balkan detour that delayed the invasion and meant the difference between Moscow in September and Moscow in December. The turn to Kiev, the greatest tactical victory in the history of warfare that spent 6 weeks in the last campaigning weather of 1941 on an objective that was not Moscow. Stalingrad, the city that was not part of the original plan, that mattered for symbolism rather than strategy. And that became the grave of 250,000 men because 2 men with absolute power could not separate their ego from their judgment. These are not the mistakes of stupid men. Hitler was not stupid. His generals were not stupid. Many of them were among the most capable military professionals of their generation. These are the mistakes of men who were very good at one kind of thinking and completely blind to another kind. My men who could read a map and calculate an operational timeline, but could not read the difference between what they wanted to be true and what was true. Germany had the better army in June 1941, better trained, better equipped, better led at every level from the general's command post to the infantry squad. The Soviet Union had the bigger country, the larger population, the greater industrial potential, and the specific advantage of fighting on its own soil for its own survival. In a short war, either the better army wins. In a long war, the bigger country wins. Hitler gambled everything on a short war. He lost. Ivan carries the letter for the rest of his life. He never has it translated. His daughter asks him about it once, when she is grown, when the war has been over for 20 years, and the world has rebuilt itself into something that does not look like Stalingrad or Kharkov or the rubble of Berlin. He takes it out and holds it for a moment. The paper's soft from years of folding and unfolding, the handwriting faded but still visible. "Why won't you find out what it says?" she asks. He folds it back along its old creases and puts it in his pocket. "I already know what it says," he tells her. She waits. It says he was 23 years old and he was cold and he was far from home and he wanted the people who loved him to know he was thinking of them. He pauses. It says the same thing they all said, the same thing I would have said, and the same thing any of them would have said if they had known it was the last thing they were going to say. He looks out the window at the street below, at the ordinary human traffic of a city that has forgotten what it looked like when it burned. 4 million men crossed a river on a June morning, believing they were walking into a 6-week campaign. 4 million men walked into the longest road in the history of warfare. Most of them never found their way back. The ones who did carry something with them, not victory, not glory, not the certainty that it was worth it, just the knowledge of what it cost, and the letter in the pocket, and the door that opened.